Matthew sat alone in the dim light of his room, the walls pressing in with a weight that no one could see. Days had blurred into nights, and nights into days, each one carrying the same silent, suffocating heaviness. The world outside moved on, as if nothing had changed, yet inside him a storm raged, quiet, relentless, and invisible. He felt himself slipping, not with a crash, but with a slow, inexorable slide into emptiness. He remembered a time when laughter was easy, when mornings were filled with the soft promise of hope. But now, hope was a stranger. Each morning he woke with the same question gnawing at the edges of his mind. Why am I still here? It was not a question meant for answers. It was a whisper that carried all the weight of despair, echoing the certainty that maybe he had already reached the end of his own story. The emptiness around him seemed alive, as if the room itself had absorbed his sorrow and breathed it back in, a mirror of the void within. He stared at the ceiling, the faint cracks tracing the lines of his own unraveling. He could feel himself fading, piece by piece, the colors of the world bleeding into a grayness that matched the dull ache in his chest. Simple acts, getting out of bed, making a cup of coffee, answering a phone call, had become mountains too steep to climb. Memories of better days haunted him. He remembered the warmth of sunlight on his skin, the laughter of friends, the ease of conversation, the spark of dreams that once ignited his heart. Each memory was a dagger, a reminder of what had been lost. And yet, even in the shadow of that loss, a faint ember of resistance lingered. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of fatigue, pain, and self-doubt, a tiny, fragile voice whispered, "Not yet." But the voice was small, easily drowned by the roar of emptiness that had come to define his life. Matthew felt the isolation of his own mind, as if he were trapped beneath a suffocating ocean. No one could reach him here. No words could pierce the veil he had drawn around himself. He was a ghost wandering among the living, unseen, unheard, untouchable. And yet, for all the darkness, there was a peculiar clarity in his despair. He knew, in some distant part of his being, that he had arrived at a threshold, a precipice. The world as he knew it had crumbled, leaving only a raw, unpolished truth. He had been reduced to himself, stripped of pretense, of distraction, of everything that had once made life bearable. It was a place of unimaginable pain, but also of profound possibility, because to fall so deeply is, in some way, to arrive at the beginning of something entirely new. Matthew didn't know it yet, but this descent, this crushing, isolating darkness, was the first step of a journey that would transform him in ways he could not yet imagine. Every tear shed in silence, every night spent staring at nothing, every moment of hopelessness, all of it was shaping him, forging a resilience hidden beneath the layers of despair. In the quiet of that room, the room that had become both prison and mirror, Matthew felt the full weight of his own mortality. He felt how fragile life could be, how tenuous the thread of existence. And in that recognition, faint as it was, a seed was planted, a seed that would one day grow into the light that now seemed impossible to imagine. As you follow Matthew's story, perhaps some parts resonated with something you felt yourself, that feeling of being lost, or a spark of hope emerging unexpectedly. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment with what touched you most, or share your own experience. Your participation helps this channel grow and bring these messages of resilience to more people who need to hear that they are not alone. Liking, commenting, and subscribing aren't just digital gestures. They spread hope and strengthen a community that believes in the power of recovery, even in the most difficult times. The weight on Matthew grew each day, silent, invisible, yet crushing. Each morning felt like an insurmountable obstacle, each step a battle against himself. Getting out of bed required effort, as if every muscle, every fiber of his body resisted life. He looked out the window at the world that continued to spin, but he felt distant, as if he were on another plane. separated from everything that had once given him meaning. The colors had disappeared, the sounds seemed muffled, and even the smells of everyday life no longer reached his heart. Everything had become gray, heavy, unreal. What had once been simple, smiling, talking, walking, now became a maze of frustration. He noticed others moving with ease, tackling trivial tasks, and felt silent envy, mixed with guilt for not being able to do the same. Every smile he saw, every conversation he overheard, reminded him of the distance that separated him from the world he loved. And at the same time, the feeling of being seen diminished with each passing day. Matthew had become almost transparent to everyone's eyes. The memories of the past, which had once been a refuge, now became subtle knives tearing at his soul. The laughter of friends, the hugs, the dreams that once seemed possible, everything became inaccessible, as if time had stripped them of their color and life. With each attempt to reconnect, he found himself trapped in a growing emptiness. There were days when even speaking to himself made no sense. Words were lost before they left his mouth, swallowed by the dense fog that enveloped his mind. Matthew felt like he was falling into an endless abyss, a place where light arrived only as a distant whisper, and every effort to climb upward seemed futile. The routine, which had once given him some comfort, had become a distant memory, a sequence of mechanical movements devoid of purpose. The loneliness wasn't just physical. It was a constant, invisible presence, watching every thought, every gesture, every breath, reminding him that he was alone. Yet even in this depth, tiny sparks persisted. Fragments of consciousness, faint and almost imperceptible, reminded him that he still breathed, still existed, still was here. It was a tiny perception, but enough to keep a door ajar to something better. Each silent tear, each sigh of exhaustion was also an invisible step toward a change he could not yet comprehend. At the bottom of the pit, Matthew began to sense, without knowing it, that the complete fall would paradoxically be the beginning of his reconstruction. And so he remained, between the crushing weight of darkness and the invisible thread of hope that refused to fade completely. Each day was painful, each hour felt like an eternity, but despite it all, he remained there, caught in his own battle, still alive, still breathing, still able to feel, and maybe, just maybe, able to be reborn. In the silence that stretched for hours, Matthew found himself face to face with himself, and for the first time, the vastness of the emptiness within him became palpable. It wasn't just the absence of joy or color, it was the absence of meaning, of direction, of any foothold that would allow him to understand who he still was. He walked aimlessly through the house, his eyes fixed on the floor, feeling the echo of each empty step reverberate as if he were alone in the entire world. Every object, every memory seemed to carry the same indifference he felt for himself. He wondered how he had gotten here, how the life that once seemed full of promise had become a desert of silence and shadows. Every memory seemed burdened with a painful distance, as if the past and the present no longer belonged together. Thoughts swirled through his mind, some gentle, some sharp, but none of them offered comfort. He tried to understand his own pain, but his own consciousness seemed to slip away, leaving only the feeling of being adrift, caught in a current that dragged him aimlessly. The introspection became both painful and revealing. Matthew realized how every choice, every loss, every ignored moment had contributed to this state of darkness. But it wasn't a judgment. It was a silent observation, a stark and raw perception of the life he had lived until then. He realized that the emptiness, however cruel, also showed him a truth he had forgotten, that the external world could fail, that people could leave. But there was something within him that still existed even when it seemed invisible, a tiny spark of awareness, of presence, of life. As he lost himself in this inner labyrinth, he began to notice details previously unnoticed. The soft light streaming through the window, the distant sound of rain hitting the roof, the steady rhythm of his own breathing. They were small signs, but signs nonetheless, reminding him that the world continued, even when it seemed indifferent, and that he could still find a point of anchor. Each perception was a tenuous thread, connecting him back to existence, and each moment of awareness was a silent reminder that he still had the power to begin rebuilding his life, even if only slowly. Deep within this void, Matthew began to recognize something he couldn't see before. That deep reflection, however painful, was also an opportunity. An opportunity to understand himself, to look at his wounds honestly, to accept his own pain without losing himself completely in it. He realized he didn't need to have all the answers now, that the process of finding himself again didn't happen all at once, but step by step, fragment by fragment. And even amidst the darkness, there was a subtle sense that the journey back to the light had already begun, even if he couldn't see the full path. And then something began to shift, so subtly that Matthew almost missed it. It was a shy spark, a restlessness deep within his chest that refused to fade, even after months of absolute darkness. He still carried the crushing weight of each previous day, but for the first time, there was a faint thread connecting him to life, a barely perceptible awareness that the world still existed for him, even if he didn't yet have the strength to embrace it fully. It all began with small signs, fragments of attention to what had previously gone unnoticed. The soft light streaming through the window seemed to touch his skin with an unexpected gentleness. The distant sound of rain hitting the roof brought a sense of rhythm, a cadence that reminded him of his own heartbeat. Each breath felt more conscious, deeper, as if life were inviting him to reconnect with it, step by step. It wasn't joy yet. It wasn't relief. It was simply the realization that breathing, simply breathing, could be enough. Matthew began to realize he didn't have to face the whole world at once. Every small gesture, making a coffee, calling a loved one, putting on a song that touched him, became an act of silent resistance against the emptiness that had consumed him. Each tiny action, charged with intention and care, served as a ray of light amidst the darkness, reminding him that there was still something inside him worth nurturing. He felt for the first time in months that he could still choose to participate in life, that he could still exist, that he could still feel. Matthew's awakening was slow and gradual, a progression almost imperceptible, but charged with meaning. He began writing again, first single words, then longer sentences, and eventually short paragraphs that described not just pain, but fragments of gratitude and memories that warmed his heart. Each word was like a brick thrown out of the darkness, each written sentence a conscious step toward rebuilding himself. And with each letter, he felt his breathing become fuller, his mind and heart begin to reorganize, to find rhythm again. The walk through the outside world, which had previously been hostile and threatening territory, began to transform into an experience of discovery. Matthew left the house slowly, at first just to feel the fresh air on his face, to hear the distant sound of life happening around him. Each step was a silent affirmation. I am here. I resist. The rain, the wind, the sunlight, all of this ceased to be mere scenery. It became touch, encouragement, a reminder that life continued, that he could still reconnect with it even fragmentarily. Each instant of conscious awareness seemed to strengthen the tenuous web of hope that was beginning to weave within him. The awakening also brought with it the understanding that true transformation did not come from a single, dramatic moment, but from a sequence of small, everyday miracles. Each act of self-care, each attempt to reconnect, each moment of awareness represented a silent, almost imperceptible, yet powerful victory. He realized he didn't need to heal all at once. He just had to persist, move step by step, and allow life itself to gradually rebuild its rhythm. Over time, Matthew began to realize that the darkness that had consumed him had also been his teacher. It forced him to confront his own frailties, to face his loneliness head-on, to acknowledge the weight he carried, and to learn to live with it without losing himself completely. The pain that had seemed overwhelming became a lesson in resilience, and each silent tear, each sleepless night, each moment of despair revealed to him the depths of his own strength, a strength he had never imagined he possessed. And so, step by step, Matthew emerged from the pit into which he had fallen. He was not yet completely healed, he had not yet achieved perfection or total joy, but he was awake, aware of his own existence, his own strength, his own worth. Every breath, every movement, every moment of self-attention became a brick in the reconstruction of his life. He learned that awakening was not an endpoint, but an ongoing process made up of small choices and silent gestures, and that each act of daily courage was in fact a declaration of victory over the darkness that once seemed insurmountable. Matthew finally began to realize that life didn't have to be grand or dramatic to be meaningful. That beauty could reside in the details, in the glow of the light on the wall, in the smell of wet earth, in the rhythm of his own heart. That strength wasn't about never falling, but about rising again and again, even when each attempt seemed insufficient. And in that silent awakening, he understood that the darkness that had molded was not its enemy, but the fertile soil from which it could finally flourish. Finally, Matthew found himself facing a truth that had previously seemed impossible to accept. That he didn't need to be perfect to be strong, that his wounds weren't signs of failure, but marks of survival, silent testaments to the courage to keep breathing, even when all seemed lost. He realized that true strength lay not in the absence of pain, but in the ability to face each day, each challenge, each inner shadow, with the knowledge that he could still choose to live. Life, which had previously seemed an unbearable burden, began to reveal itself in subtle and powerful ways. The simple act of waking up, looking up at the sky, feeling the wind on his face, became a silent celebration of existence itself. He began to smile again, not exaggeratedly or forcedly, but with the gentleness of someone finally recognizing their own worth. Every gesture, every word, every conscious moment was a reminder that despite everything, he had endured, and that each small step toward the light was, in fact, a monumental victory over the darkness that had once consumed him. Matthew discovered that sharing his story was as transformative as experiencing each step of his own reconstruction. By sharing his journey, he realized that his words could reach others who found themselves in the same labyrinths of loneliness and despair, offering them not magical solutions, but the certainty that they were not alone, that it was possible to find a way forward even when all seemed lost. He understood that overcoming was not a destination, but an ongoing process, made up of conscious choices, moments of self-attention, small gestures of care, and daily courage. And then, with this understanding, Matthew began to live with more lightness, more presence, and more purpose. He learned to appreciate each moment, to realize that life didn't have to be grand to be meaningful. That beauty resided in the details, in the sounds, the colors, the smells, in the small daily victories that together built a fulfilling existence. He discovered that rebirth was not a sudden burst of joy or success, but a patient, persistent reconstruction made up of silent and steady steps. As he reflected on his own journey, Matthew felt a deep gratitude, not only for the people who stood by him, but also for the darkness that shaped him, that forced him to look inward, to confront his wounds, to recognize his inner strength. He understood that pain didn't need to be denied or ignored, but embraced, transformed, used as fuel to grow and rise again. Every scar, every tear, every moment of despair became a symbol of resilience, a testament to the possibility of surviving and flourishing even in the most arid terrain. And so Matthew rose, not as someone invincible, but as someone aware of his own humanity, of his ability to endure, to reinvent himself, and to find light even after the darkest times. He knew there would still be difficult days, moments when the shadow might approach, but now he carried within him the certainty that he could face any darkness. For he had already emerged from the depths of the pit and discovered his own strength. Matthew's message is clear. We all face our inner battles, our silent abysses, our endless nights of doubt and pain. But even in the deepest darkness, there is the possibility of rebirth, of reconnecting with our own lives, of rebuilding ourselves piece by piece, step by step. What seemed like the end can actually be a new beginning. May Matthew's story be a reminder that no matter how intense the night, light always finds a way, and that each of us carries within us the strength to rise again. And if, as you listen to these words, you feel that the story itself resonates with something deep within you, remember, you don't have to walk alone. Share your experiences, comment on what touched your heart, like this video to strengthen this space of empathy and hope, and subscribe to the channel to follow other stories of overcoming and rebirth. Every gesture of yours helps bring this message to someone who needs to hear that they are not alone, that there is a way back to the light, and that every little spark of hope can little by little transform all darkness into life. And if you've made it this far, I want you to know that your presence matters. If this story touched something deep inside you, leave a comment like, "I'm with you until the end," or "This message was for me." I'd love to read it and know that you're on this journey with me. Subscribing to the channel is a way to continue receiving content that talks about overcoming inner strength and transformation, stories that remind us that even in the most difficult moments, there's still a path back to the light. And if you feel this message resonates with you, also like the video. It's a simple gesture that shows we're connected, that we grow together with each shared story. There's a video here that complements this topic. Click and follow me there. And if you haven't subscribed yet, take the opportunity to join our community of support and inspiration. Let's continue this journey together, discovering strength, hope, and small victories with each step.